It's a bizarre thing seeing John Lasseter now working for Netflix, the biggest competitor that Disney probably has going forward. The genius, the linchpin of Pixar, now gone to the competition. What will he do with Skydance over at Netflix? We have no idea. There's one thing that we can probably count on, and that is that John Lasseter will produce what John Lasseter produces. And that is success. Disney could use some of that, but they got rid of him. Today we're going to talk about why they got rid of John Lasseter and what it's done to the company. Hello folks, welcome back to the WDW Pro channel. We're so happy to have you. Each and every one of you out there is very important, and we do not take for a moment a single one of you for granted. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Disney, however, did take someone for granted. They took a genius for granted. It's very rare that you find someone of the caliber of a John Lasseter. It's sort of like when Apple's had Steve Jobs. You don't do anything to disrupt Steve Jobs and his creativity and the changes he brings upon the world. You could say the same thing about things like SpaceX and Elon Musk, or you could say any number of individuals, right? The Edisons of the world, those who really transform it. Whatever you may think of their political or sociological or ideological beliefs, it's completely separate from the fact that they create at such an insane level that the average person just can't even fathom how they do so. John Lasseter was one such individual, and yet Disney sent him packing out the door. 2 decades of nonstop success, and they apparently didn't want any more. Well, we're going to discuss why. We're going to discuss the method by which John Lasseter was exited, and I'm betting some of the folks over at Disney now, although they won't say publicly, are wishing that had never come to happen. They'd like to hug that man tight. It's just too bad he's quite the fright over at Netflix.
What do you make of the theory that Lasseter's push out of the Disney company was orchestrated, or the incidents were leaked at just the right time? He's from a Christian family, and after he left, Disney became more hostile towards certain views. You know, you've got the exact right person on this panel to talk about this, Pro.
Well, we will talk about it. First, I want to say that I hope, for Jim Jam's sake, that when this appeared, that Jim Jam did not cough or stand back in shock and say, "I thought I sent $4.99." I hope the number 9 key did not get stuck on you, but we greatly appreciate it. I know that's not true because you sent in this chat that's so long and so. But here's essentially what happened, and you probably know part of this, and then we'll get everybody's take on it. John Lasseter was exited from the company during the movement where we were supposed to listen to every single person of a particular biological sex, although now we don't know what that is anymore. But during that period of time, we were supposed to believe all people of that particular biological sex, and those individuals never, ever, ever deceived, particularly when it came to issues of romance or aggression. Now, during that time, John Lasseter is exited, and he is not exited for having acted in a lewd manner necessarily. He is not exited for having done any of the things that we have found out so many engaged in. He was not exited for having gone to any islands or archipelagos out at sea. Rather, John Lasseter was exited from the company because, and I'm being serious here, he hugged too much. So the allegation was that John Lasseter and how much he hugged people, that made others feel uncomfortable, and that his hugging was a negatively inspired action that he wanted, by putting his hand on someone's shoulder or patting them on the back, that he was attempting to assert control over women. Now, I find that hard to believe. John Lasseter has been in the industry for a long time, and I'm going to tell you why I find that hard to believe, and then I think it's going to be difficult to argue against this. If John Lasseter is a big old, mean old bad man, and if he's using his proclivity for hugging others as a way to make women feel uncomfortable, why did Apple hire him?
And Skydance and Netflix.
So now, Disney, in all of their wisdom, ran off the genius of all geniuses, their new Walt. They ran him off. And by the way, they did the same thing with John Favreau, it seems. I mean, John Favreau, I don't think that he's fully engaged with Star Wars anymore.
And Tony Baxter and Joe Rohde.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, they edged out Favreau from everything a long time ago. Just look at Marvel, right? Like the phase 1 was basically his direction, and then they said, "You're going to play happy, and we're not going to listen to you, and it's Feige's show now." And then they shoved him over to Star Wars,
geniuses,
and nothing's happening over there.
Yep.
It's like talk about cutting your own neck, like cutting your nose off to spite your face.
Yes.
If we could just point out, the entire Pixar purchase was not for Pixar. It was for John Lasseter and Ed Catmull. That's
exactly right.
And the reason I mentioned the other guys is because Lasseter wasn't brought in just to do Pixar. He was going to have a big influence on the parks because he loved the parks, because I think he used to be a skipper on the Jungle Cruise way back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes.
And so cool. God forbid anybody should want to return the parks to their glory when we're busy building Tiana's salt mine. So
just to make this clear, he was chief creative officer of the entire company when this happened. All of those fluffy, horrible press kits that they do, they were all pointing towards the idea, the same thing that they're trying to do with Dave Filoni. So we're not making it up with what they're doing with trying to make Filoni the spiritual successor of George Lucas. They were doing that with John Lasseter, trying to show all of the connections between the guy who made the first cell animated feature film and the guy who made the first computer generated feature film. They wanted to say that he was essentially the second coming of Walt Disney. So when you get to this moment, when you have everything going on with the bad behavior stuff that also involved Miramax, it is patently ridiculous that they would walk him out the door and there wouldn't be a lawsuit of any kind, that it was some agreement between him and Bob Iger that said, we're just going to be quiet about this and you're going to leave.
Now, wait a minute. You're telling me that Disney, who, by the way, have Leslie Headland making the Star Wars content for next year, that they are not bastions of morality? Shocked.
Wait. It was a good news, bad news story. It was the good news is he's the second coming of Walt Disney. The bad news is he's the second coming of Walt Disney.
Yes. Yep. Now here's where it gets really interesting. After Lasseter was walked out the door, and they attempted to humiliate him, and it did not work because he went to Apple. And then we'll take this one step further in a moment. After they did so, my understanding, and we've reported on this before, is that allegedly Bob Chapek wanted Jon Favreau to be the next creative officer. What happened when Bob Iger got back in power? It seems like Dave Filoni was elevated at Star Wars, and Jon Favreau has kind of been kicked to the curb. And that seems to be part and parcel with if you were at all friendly or chummy with Bob Chapek, then you can't have any power at Disney. Now, do I know that to be absolutely true? No. But this seems to be in a pattern now, where if there's someone who seems to be taking the mantle of the person who is driving success at Disney, then Iger will get rid of that person, so that Iger remains the person at top, even if it is antithetical to what the investors want.
Thou shalt have no other gods but Bob.
Yes, exactly.
No other Bob
what a great statement.
But what was he supposed to do in that situation? Favreau, I mean, it's so counterintuitive.
All of this to say, here's
go ahead, Pro. Sorry.
Let me just wrap it up at this point.
Yeah.
To show everyone what unbridled hubris does. Disney is now in a situation where the genius who drove success for 15 to 20 years for their company, and it's not Iger, it's Lasseter, the man they paid all that money to get Pixar for, they drove him out the door for frivolous, silly reasons, and now he works for Netflix, who is eating their lunch absolutely. And you think Netflix is going to give up John Lasseter anytime soon? No.
It depends on how huggy he is.
Right. I'll also point out
it's all about who you hug.
Apparently, he hugged Brad Bird and Rich Moore, two people who made excellent films for the Walt Disney Company,
and are now working for Netflix through him too.
Yes.
I see the burning castle emojis out there, folks. I'm not confused about why you're posting them in the chat. Members, of course, have access to those emojis. Also, for Slade Wilson to drop the salvo, we are now 90 likes away, so we'll see what happens there. But Spencer, you had a comment you wanted to make, and
oh yeah, it's just a sort of an addendum to what we were saying about Favreau being pushed out, and does he have any control, all that fun stuff. Has anybody here ever seen the movie Chef that he made?
Yeah.
Where he
yes, I
okay.
have.
So that
yes,
movie,
and it's marvelous.
Yeah, so for the chat, anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a very simple movie about John Favreau operating a food truck. It has a couple MCU stars. It was made in that period where he was getting shoved out, and it was sort of like, what's going on in the MCU? It's like that's like the last time I feel he made something he really cared about. Like he was happy making something, and you can feel it in that movie. And I just feel bad for Favreau being stuck now, you know, in the undertow of this all, because he doesn't deserve that.
It's a really good point, because it was right after Iron Man 2, and Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson are in it. So guys, if you are the kind of person who just reads the headlines of who's starring in the movie, you know, there you go. That being said, language warning. This is
definitely.
and I know for a fact, Spencer, that you're probably reading that MCU book that has been making the rounds, because Bounding into Comics has been covering it. That book is made to make Kevin Feige look good, and they still don't quite look good in the way they handle John Favreau.
It's bad.
But it tries. Let me say this about Favreau, too, because I think this is important for people to understand how it is that he's being pushed out twice out of two major franchises where he comes in and demonstrates he has the right stuff. So Favreau comes into Marvel and demonstrates he's got it. He can make this thing work. And then they send him out the door. Does the same thing at Star Wars. Gets sent out the door. How is this happening? Well, here's how this is happening, I think. There's an interesting story about John Favreau when he worked on Elf. Apparently, Will Ferrell was absolutely insufferable because he believed that film, Will Ferrell, the lead actor who played Buddy the Elf, he believed that dressing up as a Christmas elf was going to be the end of his career. And so he was absolutely, insatiably angry and bitter and resentful throughout the entire making of it because he thought, this is the end of me. Now, that turned out to not be true. The film is a classic.
Quite the opposite.
So Will Ferrell was completely wrong, but he thought all the way through it that this was the end of his career. So he's just awful. To this day, he will not speak with John Favreau. He refused to make a sequel, which would have made bukus of money. He refused to make a sequel because he did not want to work with John Favreau ever again. John Favreau, of course, had the rights to be the only person to do the sequel. And John Favreau has never said a negative word about Will Ferrell. It is well known throughout the industry that John Favreau is a very, very kind, very gracious person who does not burn bridges, even when somebody burns them. A class act. So if you're wondering how it is that this keeps happening to him, I think he has the personality to come in and do the right thing, but he does not necessarily defend himself for right or wrong. I'm not here to judge whether that's the right or wrong decision, but I think that's where it happens.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask a question about Lasseter and Netflix that I hope, Pro, you will ask Valiant Renegade? Why do you think the announcement came out the day after the earnings call that we all watched with Renegade? It's like, if you had this big news and you know it didn't happen overnight, why wasn't that in the call as yet another reason that everybody should buy their stock? And I think it's just brilliant in the sense that it's, and wait, there's more, you know?
That's right. It's how many news headlines are they owning now?
Exactly.
Well, I'll say two things. One is that and the Apple news came out within an hour of the Netflix news. So Apple dropping Skydance Animation happened within, I mean, if you look at the deadline articles, it's almost as if he knew, and then he just knew he had to give it some space.
Of course.
And then the earnings release happened not long after that. So I wonder if the fact that it was an Apple stock, it could have affected the Apple stock as well as the Netflix stock. And so they were playing it very carefully. Or maybe it just moved that fast.
I just think they all knew when they were going to do it, and it was orchestrated. And I just am interested in I don't know enough about the investment world to know how that would affect either company stock.
The strategy behind it.
From a PR standpoint, it is multiple news cycles, though, that they're dominating. And you have to also think this comes out directly after the Disney 100, which did not do well. So that's separate from me on the investor side, right? But from the PR standpoint, this is a masterclass in dominating the narrative.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? That Disney 100 short was comedy gold.
Ooh. Oof.
All right, everybody was talking about it for 10 minutes.
Yeah,
the one with
exactly.
Roy and Roy and Roy?
There's so many Roys, all those Roy Shermans running around. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Now it's a discussion, and that includes you. So drop a comment down below and let us know your thoughts. We covet your comments. We care about what you think. Make sure to drop a like, share, subscribe. And yes, when we're talking about the algorithms, that little notification bell, when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. We would appreciate it so much. Folks, we hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. If you're not, hang in there. Things do get better, and you're just the kind of person to overcome whatever struggles are coming your way. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.